on the tubes. We're live. Welcome in, everybody. Okay, now we're live. Thank you all very much for joining. I have the distinct pleasure of Matt Smith from Good Soil joining me today to discuss absolutely nothing. Nothing's going on today, Matt, right? Nothing. There's nothing to talk about.
I don't
right?
think so.
Yeah.
Fire meme in the background has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, right?
Not at all. Yeah, it's going to be
Right.
super chill. It's going to be completely non-controversial or uncontroversial, whatever you want to, whatever the right word is. But make sure you can hear us okay on YouTube. Make sure you can see us okay on YouTube as well. We should be going right along. So, how was your weekend?
When I initially said, yeah, sure, let's talk. I was like, let's just only talk about brisket and nothing about Elon or Tesla or Twitter or anything at all. So, no, I had a great weekend, had a nice holiday party, and then got right back to the markets opening and down 5% today. So, reality is very strong right now.
Yeah, how you doing? For sure. I'm doing great, man. Thank you for asking. Yeah, we're just hanging out. We went to a foodie fest yesterday, which was kind of underwhelming. They had to delay the thing a couple months ago because of some construction. I think a lot of vendors backed out. So my wife and I just ended up going to like a local restaurant. We just walked around the block like, oh, this place is cool. And then we ended up watching football and drinking beer and eating tacos. So I think it was a pretty good day overall. But yeah, the reason why I think a lot of people are joining us is not to hear me talk about beer and tacos, although that's probably a pretty good podcast. We're here to talk about a lot of stuff that's going on in the Tesla, Elon Musk world, specifically around sentiment and some of the things that are happening around Elon Musk and just a lot of stuff. So maybe we'll start. I'll put you on the spot, Matt, because you like to talk shit on Penn State from time to time. So maybe I'll put you on the spot here. What are your takeaways from the recent noise that's been surrounding Tesla stock, Elon Musk, and we'll turn into a conversation because I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts. And as you kind of go through your thoughts on the comment section, obviously you're all welcome to throw in your 2 cents and start a discussion there as well. Just make sure you keep it respectful, and the thought process, as always, is to just have a good open dialogue so we can all figure out how to move forward. So go ahead, Matt. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean it's a really open-ended question. So
by design,
maybe I'll start off at a high level, and I'm sure we can dive into some of the specifics. Yeah, I mean it's been tough. I mean, I had there was the whole kind of Leo Kogwan, BOD criticisms last week, which I tweeted about and put a poll out there, trying to kind of gauge sentiment, because I think Leo's point of view was that the board of directors really, I think it's even if you are completely support them, I think it's fair to say that they are Elon yes men, and they're going to do whatever like Elon wants, and they're not really putting any sort of like pressure on Elon to do anything other than what he wants. And there's a cohort of investors who think that is like by default the obvious right thing to do. And I generally think Elon needs to have as much control as possible, but I do think that there's room for some criticism within there, and I'm sure we can get into some of the specifics around that. And then just so the continued controversies over the weekend, Elon Emmett was actually at that Chappelle and Chris Rock comedy thing where Elon came out unexpectedly, and he is just like that meme that he posted of like flicking the tiger in this, like he's doing that on overdrive. Like he's doing like the steroids of like, he's bringing out the sledgehammer now, and he's like finding every tiger he can to flick. And so like, listen, I don't disagree with the vast majority of, the battles that he's picking, but I think the cumulative effect is taking a lot of people by surprise. And one last point I wanted to put out there, which I think I have not done a good job kind of articulating, is I think there's a lot of people saying like, oh, we need better like retail representation on the board. But from my perspective, the bigger problem is with institutions. Like if I'm an institution that doesn't need to buy Tesla and there's all this controversy, like why would I want to open myself up to all that criticism from people who are either offended by Elon or think that it's just, too much politicization, or, whatever, it's just easier to kind of avoid and be like, we'll let that story develop. We'll see where it goes. But I think if you did have, some, I think I'm jumping around a little bit here, but
That's okay.
I think the one thing that I think would be pretty helpful right now is just like a PR kind of type voice to just say, hey, rumor in China is not true because of XYZ. What just trying to say, oh, we're gonna, bring the share buyback question that a lot of people are raising. We're going to bring that to the attention of board, and we'll have a discussion about it. Something. Instead, it's just been kind of radio silence, and I think total radio silence from like Tesla management and the board, coupled with like Elon flicking tigers left and right, it's just it's creating this chaos where you've got the dog in the burning meme, the burning house meme. So kind of all over the board right now, but that's kind of my high level overview of what's going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, the thing that's most fascinating to me from everything there's just so many different like facets, right? There's so many different variables. There's so many different dimensions. It's really it harkens back to 2016, 2017, 2018 a little bit, where Elon wasn't helping the matter in a way by being himself, or not acting in a way that's say becoming of that role, whatever that means, right? There's a certain perception that's starting to sort of permeate parts of the investing base, the Tesla community, whatever you want to call it. And I try to be an observer as much as humanly possible during these times. And I'm trying to be, obviously I have my opinions, which I'm very happy to share, but what's very curious to me is that there is a dynamic that's very apparent. And I think for folks that are not agreeing to this fact, I would urge you to sort of look at things a little bit more clearly here. There's a clear subset of the investor base that likes Tesla and seem to really like Elon, do not like what's going on with a lot of the stuff that's happening around how the company's communicating or not communicating, how Elon is behaving or not behaving. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? Mm-hmm. But there are voices coming up that are frustrated and are not, they don't like the radio silence or whatever. That in itself tells me that there is a gap, that there's a gap somewhere, there's a gap. So that in itself means that there's a problem that needs to be solved. It's up to Tesla and Elon and the board and whoever to decide if that's a big enough priority to take on, given everything else that's happening in the world, and or given everything else that's happening within the story of Tesla and Elon and Twitter and whatever else. And what it reminds me of is that there is this dynamic where I think Elon and the board and the leaders there very much approach the investing community and the community they've built through transparency over time and through being open and kind of inspiring people about the mission, inspiring people about the returns that the company is going to have in the future. And that approach was very much in the same ilk that they would run the company internally, which is like, I'm not worried about your feelings, just focus on what's important. And the way I think about this is like, okay, so if you work at Tesla or you are part of that culture of like, let's not worry too much about feelings. Let's worry about what's really, really important. Makes a lot of sense if you are creating a filter through hiring and all this stuff, that you're bringing on people that are comfortable or are at least saying, you know what, I am okay with this because I have chosen to be part of this, one. And two, you have filtered me to make sure that I'm fitting that culture, right? Whereas when you're a public company in Tesla and you have an investing base where literally anybody with $170 now, or fractional sharing on Robinhood can buy Tesla, but then the same culture applies to the investing base. And that's where the disconnect is for me. Is like, you can absolutely 100% have a certain culture of, let's not worry about ego, let's not worry about feelings, let's not worry about opinions opinions obviously, but like, let's not worry about that stuff, that quote unquote noise. Let's just worry about first principles and physics and actions. Human emotions are perhaps not a big priority, or human concerns are not a big priority. And I'm not saying that Tesla doesn't care about people. All I'm saying is that there's a certain culture that is very much alive in that company, and it's being sort of permeated on an investor base that I think deserves a little bit more attention or TLC or just some I don't know, just different approaches, because anybody can buy Tesla stock. And that's why
Yeah.
you're a public company. That's what it means, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's where the disconnect is. It's like they're trying to hammer. It's a one type approach where they're trying to tackle everything on. And I think the sort of time that we live in today speaks to that. But it's up to them to decide if this is important or not. And this is where it's fascinating to talk to different people to get their different opinions. That's where my head is at as an observer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the radio silence part, I think too, is I think that's particularly problematic. I mean, when they were a much smaller company, that sort of thing was not that big of a deal. But when you're one of the largest companies on earth, and you've got a huge amount of like retail investors and the institutional investors for that matter, and I think it didn't start back then, but the most recent example from a fundamental standpoint was like there was no communication that they were going to end the delivery wave in Q3. And in fact, they said they were going to end the delivery wave a couple quarters ago, and then they didn't. And then they like ended the delivery wave without really communicating that to the investors or anyone. And so then there was this like huge gap, and like that was like the kind of first domino to fall in this most recent drop from 300 that we've seen in the last 2-3 months. So just like that, and then coupled with all the Elon done selling, and then he sells some more, and hey, are you done selling yet? And he still hasn't answered that question. It's we're not entitled to answers on everything that we ever want to hear, but I think with some of these more major topics, I think it could really help investors and just calm some nerves in a time when macro has sucked, and it's just been a tough year in general for investors. Just to say, okay, here's what we're doing and why, and like we hear loud and clear the feedback from all the shareholders about X, Y, and Z, and we're going to work to address those. But there's just instead it's just nothing. So that to me is probably the biggest problem.
Yeah, I would agree with. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that has rubbed me a little bit the wrong way though with one like part of the wing of this Tesla community though is like if you even say that, which to me doesn't sound very controversial, it's like, oh, like you think you know better than Elon, and it's like you can't.
I've been getting that a lot.
I've been getting that a lot too, and like the funny thing is, like, even just for posting a question of like, hey, what do you think? Like, here's a poll. What do you think? And it's like, oh, you think you're smarter than Elon now, Matt? And I'm like, no, like, first of all, no, I'm asking the question. Second of all, it's not first principles thinking to just say whatever this guy says is right de facto.
Exactly.
And so to me, that's like, if you're not disagreeing with Elon on some amount of this stuff, then you're not actually doing first principles thinking. Now, maybe your first principles thinking is wrong and you're coming to some wrong conclusions on some stuff, but like we can go through the laundry list of things that Elon has been wrong about in the past. And that doesn't mean he's like a terrible CEO or anything, but I think that when we can't have an honest conversation about some of the stuff that Elon or Tesla has gotten wrong, that only hurts us, I think, as an investor community. So that's the other thing that I've had some trouble with.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, that chorus I've been noticing as well. It's counterproductive. It's like you said it exactly. It goes against the entire premise for which the company was built on. Like literally, the only reason why Tesla exists is because there were a bunch of people internally saying we're doing this so stupidly. Like we need to like sit down and ask ourselves a very honest question. And of course, Elon was a big part of driving that ship. But to somehow think that that individual is 100% wrong, 100% right, 100% of the time is like, it's impossible. It's impossible. Yeah. Now, it's okay for people to be like, well, I agree with a lot, or I choose to not maybe put a lot of trust that he has a bigger picture in mind. That's okay. Like, I'm not saying don't do that. And I'm not saying don't go out to people and tell them, oh, you who are you to tell Elon what to do? You can say whatever you want. All I'm saying is just think about the context of that statement and apply that to what that person potentially could find so great about Tesla, which or the companies that Elon has. Is like, this is literally the mentality. I was there. Like, it's like this. Everybody constantly saying we're so dumb. Like, we need to be less dumb. Like the guy Elon himself says this all the time. We need to be less dumb. And we could be wrong. Like us sitting down and sharing feedback or criticism, we could be 100% wrong. But at least we are voicing how we feel. And I
Right.
think this is very important for feedback, and it's very helpful for the company as well, right? Like, I bet you if for some reason they come across this podcast and they feel like, hey, like these two people kind of know what they're talking about or kind of understand the story, and it looks like they're sharing these things, at the very least that's a data point they can use to say, hey, yes or no. Like, with it's just data points, we're adding data
Yeah.
points to the discussion, and I think that in itself super super valuable. you know I had a point I wanted to make before that, but I completely blanked on it. I'm sure it'll come back. um yeah, it's just a fascinating time. The other thing I remember now, the within the context of PR and communication and sort of what's happening in the landscape right now with Tesla, I think it's important to frame this discussion around the fact that even though Elon's going to be around the company for a long time in some sort of capacity, I think it becomes more and more important to seriously consider those things the less and less he becomes a percentage of the total work at Tesla. Because one
Yeah.
of the key things here is that Elon, like it or not, Elon is the face of Tesla right now. Like, when you think Tesla, you think Elon Musk. I believe, and I could be wrong. And I would love to hear people's opinions in the chat. Actually, producer Wef, if you could throw up a poll that asks that question on YouTube, I'd love to sort of gauge how people think about the company. Is Elon Musk the face of Tesla, or when you think of Tesla, do you think of Elon Musk? And the less and less that becomes true, which is 100% going to be the case here in the next, I don't know, 3, 5, 10, 20 years, however long it takes, it becomes more and more important to have a mechanism that speaks to the public and the investor base that isn't 100% routed through him. It has to be
Mhm.
done through the company. And I'm starting to already notice this in the world of Tesla with Elon bringing on all the talent, like the semi event. It was Dan, I think it was the gentleman's name. Great job, right? You have Drew and all these other guys, Zach, and all these other people becoming more and more part of the discussion. You had that insanely talented AI team that he brought on stage. He brought on that entire team for Neuralink, right? On SpaceX, he's got Gwen Shotwell just kind of running the show and killing it, right? And so I wonder how much more important that variable becomes the less and less he becomes part of the entire company's survival or how it moves into the future. How do you think about that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, 3, 4, definitely 5 years ago, I think Elon backing off as like the role of the CEO would definitely have been like a horrible thing. But now you actually see some actual Tesla investors kind of advocating for that, like, oh, we need Tom Zhu to come in here and be like the CEO of Tesla, at least automotive. And so I think that does become a good thing. Like who in their right mind would criticize Gwen Shotwell because it's like Elon's more famous, so he should run SpaceX? No, like Gwen is doing an amazing job, and she's kind of the steadying force, and he provides the vision and pushes the team, and is still heavily involved in the design of the products. As can be seen by the fact that he had his hand so involved in Starship design and choosing stainless steel, which was a huge decision.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think that's what you want him in. You want him to generate some high level interest and awareness in the company, and maybe a little bit less controversy would be fine, but you also want him to be Elon. So,
Right.
you don't want to, you can't, even if you wanted to, you can't like put a lid on him. But if you have somebody running the day-to-day operations who can come in like at a moment like this when the stock is on fire and everybody hates him, like the right and the left all hate Elon, it seems, and the investors and Tesla Q, like
He's winning.
everybody is like everybody's got a bone to pick with him. And so I think if you like in that moment, like you have a Tom Jew or someone to come in and just say, hey, listen, like we've got a really strong quarter, we got great products in the pipeline, and we're going to continue to operate, we're going to continue to execute on our world-class operations. Like somebody to come in with that like diplomatic air, which Elon very clearly has no interest in being a diplomat. But I think with Tesla being at the scale that they are, and with the investor base that they have, I think that would help to just reassure investors during a particularly volatile time.
How much of this do you think, like the way we're sort of aligned on this, is us just being quote unquote old school in our thinking and sort of like traditionally how companies have operated, and that there's a new paradigm that's arriving that that's no longer going to be part of the equation per se. And ultimately what really, really matters, and people will truly, truly not care about how somebody's perceived. Like, how do you think about that? How do you think that this is just us maybe not understanding a different strategy that will be successful in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. And like, I think a fair critique of this whole conversation could be, in 10 years, none of this will matter. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. But, there are, people that are selling based on uncertainty that, don't necessarily need to. And like, God forbid, what if Leo Kogwan gets margin called or something like that? I have no insight into, whether that's a possibility or not. But, like, there are actual funds and investors who could get portion of their shares liquidated, and you're not helping them out. Now, of course, you can level all the criticism on them, saying that they put themselves in a position to be exposed, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily either. But I think just to say, like, let volatility run amok, and in 10 years we'll all be fine. It's like, all right, well, sure, but there's going to be a lot of collateral damage along the way, and I think that approach on its own will make kind of institutional ownership take longer to get hold, because like, why, if you're a fund manager, and I am one right now, and we are getting absolutely torched by what's been going on right now, and it's like, yeah,
It's your fault, Matt. Jesus.
it's funny because like all year long we've been saying macro's a mess, but we're focused on fundamentals, and when looking at the fundamentals, we're like really like happy with the path that Tesla's on. And we're still getting smoked. It's like, even when you've got the right mindset, I think, of focusing on the company's execution on the operations, and trying to limit the noise. It's like the noise is becoming the story at this point. And I don't think that necessarily helps Tesla's mission. I mean, you've got people saying that they're not going to buy a Tesla anymore because Elon hates LGBTQ, or that he hates the environment, and he's like shilling for right-wing politicians. And like, I don't believe any of those things, but there's definitely that perception. And I even saw this on, like, Jack White had a tweet that like Elon is just doing everything for the money now, so he's leaving Twitter because, and it's like, no, the vast majority of people don't know how Elon thinks. Like, they haven't read that Tim Urban post from like 5 years ago where he really laid out like the very, very hyper logical steps of like why he's doing all the things that he's doing with Tesla and Neuralink and SpaceX and everything. So like, people who've taken the time to read these like 10 hours of blog posts from Tim Urban really understand what's actually driving Elon, but everybody else thinks he's like this egomaniacal, like crazy businessman. And I think it's just hard to explain how different he is from everybody else. And so people are kind of ascribing motives or attributes to him that are not his own, and he's not really doing much to dispel them.
Yeah, it's the other part of that too, and that's a fascinating thing you brought up. Is if you go back, you've been following Elon for a long time. For those that are not aware, we've been on the train. I started in 2012, probably. When did you start following the story, Matt? Just out of curiosity for the public.
Well, I applied to work there in 2009, actually, but never heard back. But it was just kind of, following. Oh my gosh! Imagine if I'd actually had that job. That would have been crazy. But no, so I've been kind of like following casually, maybe for the next 6 years, and then in 2017, I really started listening to earnings calls again, and then invested in early 2018.
Got it. Yeah, the thing that's interesting to think through is that when I first got introduced to Elon and the Tesla story and all that stuff, it was very much a message that was centered around what's inspiring people to make a positive change in the future, right? It seemed like it was very inclusive. Like, it was just like this big hug around humanity that said, we need to do this. Otherwise, we're all dead,
Yeah.
And the percentage of the population that was getting exposed to that was very, very small, and then it continued to grow, and it continued to grow, and it continued to grow. And what's interesting to think about is that as Tesla, Elon Musk, Twitter, I think it's fair to say now that this whole thing is mainstream. I think it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
If I go around and talk to random people, basically everybody knows who Elon Musk is. Most people couldn't care. They're not nearly as invested in the sort of things that we are invested in, which is another angle that I want to explore. But it seems like the type of things that people could be introduced to when it comes to the story of Elon Musk or his companies, there's a lot more things to choose from and pick from than the initial sort of period in from 2009 through, I don't know, 2014. And then when the call it the FUD year started, it sort of started shifting a little bit. I wonder how much of that is really impacting the the perception of Elon Musk, the perception of the stock, the potential hit on demand. And if we are potentially blowing a lot of this out of proportion because most people just don't really care that much, right? And that's one thing I want to think through because I try to apply Pareto to everything. And Pareto, for those that are not familiar, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, it's an 80-20 rule. And so the way I think about it here is the 20% is going to be the extremes, the opposite extremes of what we think about Elon Musk. One side of the 10% is super supportive of Elon Musk, will back most, if not all, of his ventures, will definitely buy Tesla, especially if we can afford it, all the positive things. And that is one bubble. And I'm in that bubble. And I would argue that you're probably in that bubble too, however you want to define that bubble. And most of the people listening to this conversation are in that bubble. And I'm not saying it's positive or negative. I'm just saying there's a circle. And then on the opposite side, on the other 10%, you have people that are invested in not liking Elon Musk. They're invested in never buying a Tesla. And they're invested in speaking out against the perceived or real harm he's doing to society, right? And those people are the other 10%. The middle 80% don't give a shit. And they're like, yeah, how can I buy something that's going to make me happy? I have these hobbies and interests that are completely unrelated to whatever these crazy people on either side are thinking about. I just want something that makes me happy. And I wonder how much of that will turn out to be the dominating story for the stock, potentially, if that is true, where the opposite 10% don't really matter within that context. It's just the thing that turns out. And that all hinges in ensuring that you create an incredible product that most people love. And the parallel I draw is Amazon and Jeff Bezos. I ran a poll not too long ago on Twitter, and a lot of people dislike Jeff Bezos, but literally everybody uses Amazon. So I wonder if that's the new dynamic now, and that's what it's going to become. How do you think about that? I'm curious to hear your thought process and whatever else. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you. Like, I would think of the people who are potential Tesla car purchasers, how many of them would change their behavior either to not buy a car or to buy one because of their affiliation or hatred of his point of view on anything. Like, I think that's going to be rounding error. So like, I think you're right. The middle swath of the buying public is going to be like, oh yeah, that guy who paid too much for Twitter or something, or in whatever nugget they've heard before, and they kind of like half remember the story. They're like, yeah, sure. Like, but it's butts and seats. Like, it still really is about the driving experience of the car. Like, that's really, I believe, what matters more than anything. So yeah, like, to me, it's not really a demand issue. That's why I really have been saying all year, like, fundamentals, even as much chaos as he's kind of unleashing on the social media world and everything right now, I don't think it really changes much on the Tesla demand side. It probably a little bit at the fringes, like you said, but like, for all most of the commentary I've seen is like, Elon's upsetting all the Democrats, and I forget what the numbers are, like 70% of the Tesla car buying public or something like that. So he's like killing his own brand. Well, he's probably also ingratiating himself to people who have not been historic buyers of Teslas. And so that offsets somewhat, I would think, whatever sliver of both sides, either, like or dislike what he's saying and will change their buying behavior. Like, to me, that's like, it's not, it doesn't rise to the level of changing the fundamentals of the business, I don't think. The more damage, I think, is done on the kind of stock price movement and lack of communication and that sort of thing. But in terms of fundamentals, like, I think those are still really strong. And you can talk about China and macro, and those are like legitimate issues. But I don't think I think those are like 10x or more the impact of like Elon being overly political.
Got it. So do you view this sort of perception time that we're in right now, do you think that's a short term, medium term, long term? What are the like I'm assuming you're thinking about it as a hopefully like I'm guessing what your heart's telling you is hopefully this is not a thing that's really going to impact demand, which is where I'm at too. And over time, the fundamentals will just show themselves, especially in a bull market and where there's a more friendly environment for rates from the Fed, right?
Mhm.
Is that how you're thinking about it?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah. I
fair?
mean, I'm a lot more concerned with, does the Fed kill the economy for the next, 18 months? Because, if interest rates are 7%, then car loans are going to be a lot more expensive, and Tesla's going to have to drive down prices. Not to mention, the collateral damage of, higher unemployment and, people not having as much, wealth in their savings accounts to buy a $80,000 car. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that I think are way more uncertain and potentially a lot more impactful than Elon's commentary right now. So yeah, I do think that this is short term. Like I think whatever happens with this noise, I think what's really going to drive the stock price, let's say you and I are talking a year from now, is going to be how have the next 4 quarters of financials looked. I mean, are they able to maintain some margin or some margin power, some pricing power? Are they able to continue to sell as many vehicles as they are producing? I mean, that's one of the concerns that I see creeping in now on the fundamental side is, with demand seeming to show some signs of weakness. I would argue it's actually intentional because they didn't want to have a 6-month backlog. This was so known to me. It's like they raised their prices $20,000 in a year. Of course, that's going to lower your demand. But that's what he said back in Q2 is that we want to shorten lead times, and they've done that now. So then the
Mhm.
question becomes, where's that new equilibrium between supply and demand? So that's a legitimate question. I think we don't know the answer to that yet, but I think it's going to be enough to kind of support the product output of all 4 factories at decent margins. But a year from now, we're going to have the answers to all those questions and be like, oh yeah, they actually could sell 2.2 million units in 23 or whatever the number ends up being, and generate earnings above or below whatever Wall Street thinks right now. Like that's going to be what's way more important to the I think that's near term stock price, or medium term maybe, than any of this noise right now.
Mhm. How do you view I've been thinking through this a little bit. So like we spent the last 30 minutes, which felt like 5 minutes, talking about most of it, the Elon Musk perception, right? But I think
Mhm.
there's also a separate variable as well, and we'll get into like the long term stuff too, like the fundamentals and things. But then the other variable that I'm thinking through as well is like Twitter itself as a business that's a I almost don't want to say overhang because people are just going to be like, there is no Twitter overhang, but and some people will say there is, and how that business itself could drag down the Tesla story. What I'm seeing is there are some variables that are coming up that it seems like the type of um the amount of attention sorry the amount of partners that Tesla would have from an ad perspective, like people just spending ads on Twitter and or buying ads on Twitter, and companies coming and being part of that, with Apple now continuing to be part of it. Apparently Amazon's part of that discussion now, and you have the cost cleanup, call it, that Elon Musk has done on the company from a organization perspective, laying off a bunch of workers. My gut tells me is that company is probably going to have 50% or less costs than it did before he took over. And then you think about it within an environment of the ad revenue really not going away nearly as much as people thought, plus his $8 a month blue check mark. There's an opportunity for Twitter here to be financially stable very, very quickly. And like my gut tells me sometime in the middle of next quarter, potentially, that could be a catalyst for Tesla, because it removes the worry of that business being a actual long term impact to Elon's ability to focus on Tesla. Let's say, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, because one of the concerns that's still out there is he going to have to continue to sell shares to fund the negative cash flow of the business, plus the pretty burdensome debt loads that he added on for the acquisition. I think people who've done the math think that's even if he did have to theoretically sell a little bit more, it'd be a drop in the bucket. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there was maybe 6 months ago or something, somebody posted, it was Aswath Damodaran, I think, actually, who's this amazing valuation professor out of NYU. Been following him for a long time, just great stuff. But he posted this like bar chart of Tesla's revenue, or Tesla of Twitter's revenue and like operating expenses over time. And they had this like perfect hockey stick growth of revenue, but they also grew their expenses exponentially, just like they actually outpaced their revenue growth. Like, you had this perfect revenue growth opportunity in a software company where of course there's operating leverage, and instead you like gave wine to your employees and had yoga rooms and stuff, just
Hell
like in
yeah.
$400 lunches. It's like, it's so infuriating to me that like you've got this like just perfect platform to generate operating leverage and really free cash flow, and you just burden the hell out of the business with a bunch of expenses and perks and way more employees than you actually need to do anything. So yeah, I completely agree with you. Elon's like cutting out a decade's worth of fat. And like, I don't mean to depersonalize this. Like, I've been probably guilty of being a little bit too critical of the previous Twitter employees, and I don't know them, and it's not really fair to be like rejoicing when people are losing their jobs. So I don't want to dehumanize it too much. But I do think from just a pure, a business standpoint, like something had to be done, or that business would go bankrupt. Like, you can't have expenses higher than revenue indefinitely. Like, that just doesn't work. So, I think he's doing things that he needs to do for the long-term sustainability of the business. And I agree with you. I think it's going to be a relatively short amount of time. He's like, the changes that he's making at Twitter are already coming really fast. And I think they are, generally speaking, improvements that are making the overall user experience a lot better. So I think that's going to continue. I think, the advertisers are going to come back, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's, we get some tweet from Elon saying like, oh, we've reached free cash flow positive for Q1, like you were suggesting, or something like that. So, and I think that can be a boost to Tesla in an indirect way, or, at least removes one of the, like, sort of Damocles over Tesla's share price right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think in respects to Twitter itself, it's more a reflection of leadership than a reflection of the employees. That most of the people that were let go couldn't make change, unfortunately.
Oh, sure.
And they were the byproduct of probably 3 or 4 really bad leaders who they weren't interested in making the business the best version of itself, and then everybody else suffered because of it. And so putting blame on Elon for that is completely not fair to Elon, to be completely honest.
Right.
But it's also not fair to everybody who lost their jobs. It's just a sucky situation. But I think it's important to put, as somebody who's been part of building businesses, it's the leader's fault. That's why it happens. The leaders don't care enough to ensure that the business will be successful long term, or maybe they do care enough, but they just don't know how to do it. Right. So I don't want to like attack their humanness. Right. Maybe they just didn't have the ability to do so. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And I really do think that's going to set an example. It's going to remind, I think, folks that might be a little bit concerned about the ability for Elon Musk to execute as a business leader. I think it's going to be a very big reminder that says, if there's one thing the guy does extremely well, is execute. Is execute business, it's execute engineering, and he's extremely capable of finding opportunities that are world-changing, that can be done today, that a lot of people would not be willing to risk because it's going to suck really bad, or it's going to attract a lot of attention, or it's just they don't want to do it because, like, who's crazy enough?
Hard amount of work, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. I definitely get the impression like Jack didn't want to like have, I forget how Elon exactly worded it, but like extreme levels of hard work or something like that. And like, that's kind of what you need, to make the changes that they need to make right now. Now you can argue about whether that's, sustainable in the long term or not. But I mean, Jack himself even admitted that he hired too many people too fast. And so he apologized. And ultimately, like, those people who lost their jobs, it's way more on Jack's shoulders in my mind than on Elon's. The one who hired people that he couldn't actually afford versus the one who finally took the hard medicine to get rid of all the waste. like, it's pretty clear to me that that was, the right move, and that, Jack is more at fault for the kind of hot mess that Twitter had become, than Elon, who came in and is, taking all the flack for it. Like, you never see anybody criticizing Jack for all the stuff that's coming out in the Twitter files, or,
The
the
Twitter what?
you
I'm kidding.
haven't
I'm
heard.
kidding. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there. Sorry.
No, I mean, I
Yeah,
was wrapping it up. I mean, it's just
yeah,
like Jack is a much better lightning rod, I think, of actual blame than Elon is, who is the one who's taking all the blame. So it's
yeah.
just, it's a little frustrating.
But props to Jack, though. I mean, he did come forward and said, "Hey, this is my fault." He
Mhm.
had a tweet that said, "This is my fault."
Yeah,
You know, so that to me tells me that he has great character and he's a good human being. And people
that's
make
true.
mistakes all the time. You
But
know.
and the same time, he's, coming out and saying, "Oh, this is false," with regard to the, like, child exploitation tweets that Elon is, putting out there. He's like, Elon's like, "No, this is not false. Like, this employee right here was requesting funding to, combat, child pornography on your platform, essentially, and you
Mm.
guys didn't give them the funding." Meanwhile, like, all the, right wing, um, commentators that are, being driven off the platform in violation of Twitter's own rules. It's like the prioritization, like, regardless of, like, whether you think the right wing people should or should not have been taken off, the fact that it was prioritized over child exploitation, like, that's like the
Yeah,
horrible thing in my, like, that's the smoking gun of this whole thing. Like, but
yeah.
like, this point seems to get lost on, like, all the mainstream media and everything.
I agree. It's a perfect example that says this is why delegation is so freaking hard. It's
Yeah.
so hard to delegate. Like I don't think it's a secret that Jack wasn't involved with Twitter very much, if at all, especially towards the end of the transaction. I mean, he was removed as CEO, right? Or he I don't know if removed, but he left,
Yeah.
and he put in place Parag and that leadership group, and then that's just it took a life of its own. So it's and this is like the parallel I draw between Twitter and, like, say a Tesla scenario or SpaceX is like there is a good way of delegating and there is a bad way of delegating. And I think SpaceX is a perfect example of what it looks like to be a masterful delegator. And Twitter is a horrific example of what it means to be a delegator, right? So like that's and those two are 100% based on a leader that is willing to build out a leadership group that's going to move forward the culture and it's going to move forward the mission of the company, even without that leader existing. And part of that is what gives me a lot of hope that in, say, that the medium term, I don't know, next 3 to 6 months, places like Tesla and Twitter specifically are going to be at a point, in my opinion, where we're going to have, and this is me just maybe wishful thinking and being way too optimistic, where we can have both the best of both worlds. And what I mean by that is you have a Tesla and Twitter company that are moving their missions forward, are making a giant difference in the world. Everybody who works there is 100% bought into the mission. They're creating incredible products. They're serving their investors really, really well. And Elon is Elon. Like, can those two worlds exist, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to die down. People, like, one thing that's become pretty apparent to me over the last 5 years, 10 years is, like, people love to kind of go from car crash to car crash and, like, look at it and then move on to the next thing. And, even, like, some of the cancel culture stuff that was really popular a couple of years ago is, like, they just getting people to apologize, and then, like, oh, the next person, like, I don't know, like, Alec Baldwin killed someone. I'm pretty sure, like, people are going to go see his movies again one day. Like, I haven't been following that too closely. Like, and I have no idea who's at fault in that, but I just have a feeling that in, like, 3 years, nobody's going to really care that much, or it'll be like, oh yeah, like, there was that thing. And so I think, it's something similar will pan out here, where, like, Elon, he'll probably tone it down a little bit, because, like, even by his, like, standards, which are to be, like, particularly divisive, this has been a, like, amplification from his normal levels of divisiveness, I think. But I
Mm.
think that's because he's stepping into a total disaster of, like, this Twitter situation, and he's finding stuff that, you know seemed like it was pretty apparent that there was some shady stuff going down at Twitter, and now he's like, oh, yep, sure it was, and here's like exactly what happened. And like, of course that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but we're not going to be having these same sort of revelations 6-12 months from now, and people will lose interest because they always do. And I think we'll just get back to focusing on the fundamentals of the business. So this has been a rough time, but I don't think anything about this is fundamental or sticky or will be something that we're really talking about in a year.
Do you think this would be getting nearly as much attention from, say, us and everybody else who's doing this if we were in a bull market?
Yeah, this is something I was thinking about recently. Yeah, so let's just say for hypothetical purposes that Tesla was still at like the 300 level. It's just been like flat for the last couple months. For sure, we wouldn't care. Like, oh, there's Elon sticking it to the man again. All right, Elon. But like, because everybody's hurting here so much, it's like, oh gosh, Elon, do you have to? We're certainly overly emotionalizing it based on the short-term stock price. I think that I struggle to see anybody kind of say, no, that's not happening. Because it is emotional. It is, hard. And, especially like in Emmett and my shoes where we're managing people's money. I think it's a lot harder for money managers too, who have, performance that is taking a hit from sticking with this company and with this guy who we believe in, but is, doing things that are really hurting in the short term.
Yeah. Do you think he has a fiduciary duty to not be so outspoken? And this is probably a loaded question, but I'm happy to give you my take too. Like, how do you view that?
Well, I mean, like the fiduciary duty is a very like strict legal requirement, and so if from a legalistic standpoint, no, he doesn't have a duty to not be controversial. He has a duty to not like materially hurt the stock by acting in his own self-interest or something like that. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly what the red lines are, but he's clearly not stepping on them. Otherwise he'd be, like prosecuted. So like, I think he could do a better job of trying to act in his shareholders' interests. And I think the selling on Tesla just in those huge blocks, like Gary's had some great commentary about how the way that he went about those sales was done in a way that really hurt the stock price. And so he like, I don't understand why he didn't, try to do like a pipe transaction with that, or like something that was, you could do in like big blocks to private buyers, in a way that didn't just like tank the stock $20 in like an hour. Like it was very apparent with the way that he sold on those days that he was selling. So yeah, I mean, he's done some things that I think were not in the best interest of shareholders. But I'm curious, what's your take? You've clearly thought about this too.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, shout out to the 1,072 people on YouTube, a little over 250 on Spaces. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is that Elon is a disruptor first and foremost, and he's proven that multiple times. And so what's happening now is that he is entering a stage of his life, a stage of his career, where the things that he's looking to disrupt are not just engineering challenges, but like social. They are much more public facing. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable. But that's how true innovation and disruption feels like, right? Mm-hmm. The question becomes, is this on purpose, or is this an action that is truly going to jeopardize the company? Or is this just a phase that is quote unquote needed to be able to reach the next stage of whatever the individual is trying to build? And I think that is what's so confusing about this whole thing, because it's not clear that that's the case. Whereas I think in the past, Elon was very good at making that as a clear thing to be part of the future. So if I'm going to draw a parallel, the current Twitter landscape, the media landscape, the free speech landscape is legacy auto, and Elon's like hammer, boom, here comes Tesla. And Tesla is how he's approaching all this stuff, right? And again, this could be me giving him way too much credit in how he approaches problem solving. But part of me wonders, like, okay, so maybe that's what it is. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's where he's, people have been very critical of him in the past in how he approaches some things that he's building. And because he's in a completely different environment, that could very much be the case, is that we're not used to that kind of person. But at the same time, I do think that there are some obvious missteps that he makes from time to time, specifically tied to communication, that are just not that it's 100% avoidable. And one of the I like to throw back on Elon is like he always says, the best part is no part, right? The
Mhm.
best process is no process. The best noise is no noise. Okay,
Yeah, that's a fair
so
point.
like, bro, come on, how about you take your own advice from time to time? you know so but again, I think it's a reminder that we're all human. I think there's another piece of it too, and I may have been guilty of this, and I might still be guilty of this, to this day, is that Elon's a very aspirational figure. He's somebody that a lot of people look up to. He's somebody that has changed the game in so many different ways that people can't be helped but be drawn to that person. And sometimes when that person doesn't act in like what fits your moral sort of standing, and you have some dissonance and confliction, if that's even a word, there's two things that happen. You either lean in harder into, yes, this is totally what he means, or you're like just completely distraught because this person that you had such high hopes for is not acting in a way that's befitting of what you had in mind for that person. And I think that's another part of it too. And ultimately, it's like the dude's just, I think it just comes down to, do you trust the individual or not? And for me, I think he has a track record of trust. I think he has a track record of execution, but he's clearly not perfect. And so I try to put all of this within that lens. And when I think about fiduciary duty, I look at it that way. It's like the dude's trying. He's
Yeah.
trying, and it's okay for him to come out and say his opinions. The question becomes, is that a big enough impact to how his businesses sort of operate that it's going to derail it and really hurt investors? And I don't think that's the case. I just think he's
Yeah.
ruffling a lot of feathers that are like, why are you ruffling them? But you ruffling them doesn't, I think, impact the long-term potential of the things that you're allowing the people to invest
Yeah.
in. But like the question still stands up, but like, why?
Well,
you
I
know?
think I think like all of his behavior recently, I think is actually really consistent with all of his choices, even going back to like founding SpaceX and Tesla. Like the reason that he founded these companies to begin with because they were existential threats to humanity. Like having like a backup copy plus of civilization on Mars and being multiplanetary to ensure our long-term civilization. Like that's why he started SpaceX. Like it wasn't to make money. Nobody thought you would make money with a rocket startup in '06 or whenever they were founded. Much less an electric car company. But he did that because he really believed in the importance of sustainable energy generation and transportation. So like the reason, like now that they're successful and Tesla's generating a lot of cash flow, I think like the narrative has switched a little bit where people are like, oh, like yeah, like he's just like a businessman and he should really like stick to that. But in my mind, it's like no, like he's still trying to solve like existential threats to humanity, and it's like free speech is one. The whole woke mind virus thing. Now a lot more people disagree with him that those are like actual threats to civilization and to humanity, but the logic is just as applicable in my mind of like following like, oh yeah, I am going to pick these fights because nobody else is doing it. Like the media is just getting worse and worse. Like objectively, I'm pretty sure nobody trusts the media anymore. So like you've got
Yeah.
that, I forget what do they call it, like the fourth branch of government, or there's some term like that where like the thing that was supposed to keep government power in check is no longer functioning, and so like we need some alternative way to do it now in the 21st century. And you've got
Checks and
you
balances.
know well, yeah, there was a different phrase I was
Okay.
trying to think of, but my recall is like, impaired by my lack of sleep with all the kids. Um, yeah, the best controversy is no controversy. Somebody said the best tweet is no tweet, and Elon clearly believes that the best, um, oh god, oh my brain is going out at the worst possible time. The worst birth control is no birth control. That's what I was going to say. I didn't even say that. I totally botched it. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
But anyway, he's clearly like focused on trying to solve these problems, and like SpaceX and Tesla are doing relatively well now, and so now he's trying to turn his attention toward Twitter to really improve the quality of public discourse so that we can talk about things like whatever the next coronavirus is, and he's clearly being very critical of Fauci right now because he didn't like the way that was handled by the media and by Twitter in particular. And so, I think like people are saying, oh, he's picking fights with all these like distinguished people and everything. And I think that's very intentional. And I think he's doing it not in any sort of like change of behavior or change of mindset. In my mind, it's actually entirely consistent with the way that he's been doing things for the last 2 decades.
I agree. I agree with you there. I think it's definitely consistent in focus. The execution of that focus within the realm of public perception, I think, is what's causing a lot of the sort of issues and pain that people are feeling. But I agree 100% with you. And what's fascinating, like put it within the timeline of like Tesla. What is Tesla's original mission statement? To advance the advent of sustainable transport. It's not to ensure that Tesla is the most profitable company in the world, right? And so like when I view it from that perspective, okay, so technically one could argue that the mission statement of that company is complete. We have Tesla has officially advanced the advent of sustainable transport. Energy generation still work in progress.
Later, so that wasn't the original though, right? Like
exactly. Yeah. So I wonder how much of that, and again, this is me maybe playing like incredibly amateur psychologist who doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. But like I wonder if some of that is in his head. He's like, exactly to your point. This is now built. Yes, we still have to build some things in the middle here to ensure that the management team at the company and the leadership is built correctly so that it doesn't fizzle out, and we still ensure that our public investors, the people that have invested money in the company to ensure that it survives and that they're betting that this is going to be a really, really successful thing in the future. We got to make sure we don't mess them, screw them over. But like my focus here, my mission is complete. So now, being the person, and again, this is me trying to get into Elon's head, me being the person that I am, who I know that I'm attracted to big ideas and big things that I'm trying to solve. And I feel like I can really go in and make a huge difference. I'm going to try to be as helpful as humanly possible to society. So I'm going to tackle the next existential thing, which, he mentioned, recently on Twitter, and you mentioned the woke mind virus, or freedom of speech, or whatever that is. And these are giant social issues. But at the same time, within the same token, he has made it very clear that he's looking to hire somebody to head that effort at Twitter, to head that, to get that CEO or leader that's going to be in charge of Twitter to move it forward. And that could happen as early as I don't know, maybe next quarter, or maybe 2 years. Who knows how long it could take? But what my gut tells me is that once Twitter is profitable, which I really think it's going to be sooner than a lot of people expect, I think that's when that lever gets pulled. He removes himself, I hope, as the head and the face of Twitter. They allow somebody else to come in and really be the face and the person that's really driving the ship for that company. And maybe at the same time, something similar happens at Tesla, where he starts putting these leaders in place that are championing different segments of the company. So we talked about Tom Zhu, who's he's the leader currently in China of basically China Automotive. The rumor is that he might be next CEO. I don't really think that's the case. He's going to be probably head of auto. And then you put him in place. You got forget the gentleman's name in the AI. Hashak. I'm so sorry.
Ashok.
I forget.
Yeah.
Ashok. Yeah. Thank you. He's leader of AI. Put in a different person for energy. Get your subdivision set up, and yet Elon is still, say, president, CEO, or whatever. Same thing in SpaceX. But then you start becoming less and less the public face, per se, of these giant companies, but you still throw your hat in the ring for all the different things that you have been. But at least you're maximizing the chances of people not viewing your thoughts and your opinions as an attack vector for the companies that you've built.
Yeah.
Unless you really want that to be the case, which it is what it is if it is. But I don't think that makes a lot of sense from an adoption perspective. So that's where my head is at with that. Do you have any thoughts there at all?
I mean, he's still, if he's brought up on stage somewhere, he's still introduced, or in most people's mind, he's the CEO of Tesla. Like that, of all of his titles and things that he's done, that's the one that I think gets the most attention. So, if he had a different person kind of wearing that title, and he was, going out and doing his, things like, kind of like Bezos did when he stepped off from Amazon. Obviously, Bill Gates, like people, like Bill Gates is doing all sorts of stuff that people don't like. I don't have an opinion on it. But like nobody thinks that like his controversies that he may or may not get into impacts Microsoft right now. So I think if Elon was to be a little bit more removed, then that would create some sort of shielding for Tesla. But I kind of agree with you. I don't think that's coming, at least soon. I think Tom Ju. I get a little confused because like I want to go into my Mandarin pronunciation, Tom Ju or something like that.
Show off.
Otherwise, it's like Tom the Jew. It kind of sounds like I'm saying Tom Jew. I don't know. I never know like how Americanized to go with it. Anyway, like I don't think it would make sense for him to step in as like CEO and all of a sudden have like Zach Kirkhorn reporting to Tom. Like to me, that doesn't make any sense. So I think Elon will stay there, but maybe that becomes clear that okay, Tom's going to have increased responsibility going forward, and then in a year or two, like he'll have more exposure, be on the earnings calls, like see a little bit more of like the top tier management kind of stuff that Elon is doing. And Elon clearly doesn't want to do that stuff. Like Elon does not like, all the managerial stuff that goes along with being a CEO. So maybe you groom him to take over in a couple of years, but I agree with you. It's not right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting time, and I want to be 100% clear. I don't want Elon to stop working on what he's great at and what he has openly said he wants to work on, which is engineering and design and making cool shit. Please do that for the rest of your life if you can. Like, and I'm not saying stop that. All I'm saying is from a first principle standpoint of maximizing the chance and the adoption of said technologies, it probably makes the most sense to reduce as much risk that could impact the ability to ensure that those things are entrenched. That's all I'm saying, right? And if that means that his public perception is actually somewhat impacting that, then it's just analyze it. And then decide, and then again, maybe with the equations like, well, it's not a big enough impact, so it's not a big enough priority for me. Okay, cool, whatever. Like it is what it is, and we just have to figure out how to navigate through that standing. So let's shift to maybe Q4 a little bit. If unless you have any other thoughts around, because I mean, this is we could keep talking about this for the whole podcast, but I feel like there's other things that we might want to hit. Any other thoughts before we talk about Q4 a little bit?
No, I mean, we could probably keep going down more and more controversial topics and alienate half the.
Let's get demonetized.
half the audience.
Okay.
So happy to move on to fundamentals in Q4 and all that stuff.
Sure. So what are you thinking? Q4 fundamentals. What's front of mind?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question in my mind right now is deliveries. I've been kind of thinking 450,000 all along. Troy started off the quarter at 400, which was like, wow, that doesn't seem right. But I appreciated his willingness to kind of think from first principles. But now he's back up to 430, but like there's all these demand concerns, especially in China. But the numbers so far I think have been relatively healthy. So I think it's going to be a pretty strong quarter. I mean, ultimately, I think it's going to come down to production and how significantly the wave ends in Q4. Is it going to be like a hard drop and there's like a 50,000 unit delta between production and deliveries? I think if that's the case, that's going to really hurt the stock, because there will be the easy commentary is just going to be, there's not enough demand. And so Tesla's building supply into a demand shortage. And so 2023 is going to be, a train wreck. Even if the real answer is just that, it's optimizing for cost and maybe even a little bit of trying to play the IRA game a little bit, at least here in the United States. So I'm not sure where it's going to land in here. I think if I had to guess right now, I'd say I'm probably leaning towards like, 440,000 deliveries, somewhere in that neighborhood. But my confidence, I guess, is a little bit low. But we can go into all the other items below the line, but that's kind of the one that jumps out right now. What are you thinking in terms of where we go?
Yeah, I was at 450 myself. And part of me still says that's achievable. Only because I don't know. Like literally, it's just gut feel. There's not scientific, which is the worst way to approach it. So I'm probably going to apply like a 5 to 10% Farzad is way too bullish factor on it, and then reduce it by that number, which is going to land us at somewhere between 430. Call it so 420 to 440 is probably the realistic range. The one thing I'm tracking and I'm trying to track and I'm having a tough time sort of thinking through is Elon has come out and spoken about the Fed is making a mistake by raising rates because there's basically deflation everywhere. And I feel like that signal wouldn't have come up unless he's seeing that firsthand in the supply chain. So what that tells me is I wonder how much of the Q4 quote unquote it's going to be epic, the performance that Elon talked about at I think the Q3 earnings call.
Yeah, that was Q3.
Is it is that variable that the margins are going to just surprise a lot to the upside because of that realization in supply chain savings, which is going to offset some of the price cuts that have happened recently. And I don't when is the last time the US did a price cut? I don't think they haven't done a price cut yet, right? It was just in China, if I remember correctly.
I thought I read something about like a less than $1,000 incentive if there was delivery before year end, but that could have just been a rumor. But yeah, I mean, in the U.S., I think that it's not been substantial for sure. So you still do have the benefit of these really high ASPs,
Right.
which frankly didn't make their way into the Q3 financials as much as I was expecting. I was expecting a pretty big increase in ASPs just based on the how significant the price increases were that we've seen so far this year, but they really didn't move up as much as the price increases would have suggested. So either the mix has really strongly shifted toward the lower end vehicles, or it's possible that more of the higher priced vehicles are going to be delivered in Q4, in which case, to your point, like that could be really nice, kind of margin news for Q4, especially if you're kind of coupling that with some supply chain easing like you were suggesting. So that's certainly possible. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking of like interest rates are directly related to the monthly payment that somebody can afford to make on a vehicle. It's a lot like mortgages in that way. So it certainly does hurt vehicle demand when interest rates go from like what was a car loan interest rate, like 2.75% a couple of years ago.
3% max.
Yeah, something like that. Now it's probably like 6.5%, something like that, I would think. So I mean, I think that doesn't completely kill demand, but if it goes to 10, I mean, that really makes the monthly payment a lot higher. And coupling that with a potential recession and people losing jobs and savings taking a hit, like we talked about earlier, all those things I think are potential demand concerns, even if the underlying strength of like the operating leverage of the company and the margins that they're seeing from their supply chain efficiencies. I think I agree with you that those are probably improving right now. But it's do those trends offset each other a little bit?
Yeah. I also think too is if there was a serious demand issue, I feel like the prices would have been cut into a lot more than they have as of late, unless the thought process is, they're talking about undoing the delivery wave, which means building up inventory everywhere. Unless the thought process here is because we're building up so much inventory everywhere, we're going to wait until say Q1 to come around, then we're going to do a one-time price cut. And then it's just going to deplete the inventory, and then we're back to square one. Having to do delivery waves again. So those are like variables that I'm thinking through as well. The demand issue, though, and I'd love for you to, see if you can challenge me on this, because I'm still struggling to really buy into the fact that demand is going to be really an issue whatsoever, even in a very heavily recessionary environment. So the way I'm thinking about it is 97% of the fleet in the world is still gas cars. There's still a significant number of vehicles out there across the world that are within the call it the segment that Tesla sells into, that are gas cars. Especially if the robotaxi comes out or the cheaper vehicle comes out in the Cybertruck, then it's the circle has gotten much bigger. The pie is much larger. So within that context, there's so many gas cars to sell against. And if there's going to be a lot of government incentives especially starting in 2023 in the US, that's going to drive a lot of the consumer focus towards that technology. And if you're somebody who's looking to buy a car, period, even if we're saying 50% less buyers in 2023 versus 2022, that's still a 30 million or 40 million people in the world that will buy a new car in 2023. And if the world governments are saying buy EV, why would Tesla suffer from that? Help me understand that.
No, it's a great point, and this is something where like I've been holding contradictory views in my own head for a long time on this because like I mean the high level, you know, the kind of Tesla Q narrative, which has some weaknesses, which we'll go into, but is that automotive is highly cyclical. Tesla's no different just because they're an EV company. Plus, on top of that, they're selling premium priced cars, and those are going to get hit the hardest in you know, in a recession. So yeah, I mean, let's say we've got a severe recession and Tesla's got capacity to build over 2 million vehicles a year, but you know, demand at least at the current price points is only for, I pick a number like 1.2 million or something like that. Then you've got to like cut prices until you get to the point where you know your demand matches your supply. And so how low do they have to cut? And so if they have to cut enough that their margins go down to say industry average and they've got like a 10% gross margin instead of the 30% gross margins we were seeing earlier this year, then valuation gets hit real hard. They probably have to pause future factory expansions, you know, multiple compression, all that bad stuff. So like that's a realistic outcome. I think it's unlikely, but I understand the logic of it. But to your point, like overall, and this is something that, you know, JPR 007 has been tweeting forever, is that like you've got, you know, right now to your point, a couple of years ago, it was like 99% ICE vehicle sales. And then those are, I think almost everybody agrees that those are going to really dwindle down over the next 10, 15, 20 years, pick your time horizon. And it's going to be replaced by EVs. So how quickly does that transition happen? And at what price point, especially in a recession, like that's when like all these variables just get like so complicated to try to think through or to try to model out. Like if total automotive demand drops by 25% next year, which is not unprecedented in a recession, then obviously that's going to hurt car companies. But then what percentage of that is EVs? So like can the total quantity of EVs actually rise in an environment where, you know, overall vehicle sales are down 25%? Yeah, I think that's possible, but it's also not a given. So it's like you've got like this Monte Carlo situation where like, okay, the total automotive sales are flat, or they're, you know, down 25%, or they're down 10% or something like that. And then what happens to the EVs in that scenario? Like, do they still rise, or do they drop proportionally, or do they drop but only like half as much as ICE vehicle sales? Like, we don't know the answer because we're in a really unique point in automotive history on this transition right now. But there was an interesting conversation Emmett and I had with Jordan Giesecke from The Limiting Factor, and then Josh, he's on Twitter at Josh is Blonde. But we were talking about, you know, this whole transition and how their view is really that, you know, that we're going to be supply limited on materials like for this decade. And so even in a scenario where like overall automotive demand drops, their thinking is like the demand for EVs is going to be so high and the supply of EVs is going to be so heavily constrained that whoever's got, you know, the access to most of the materials is going to have just like ridiculous pricing power. So even if Tesla can't expand to 20 million vehicles by 2030, which they both don't think Tesla can actually get to those numbers, they think that's just like kind of pie in the sky, and there's just not enough lithium, there's not enough like processing capability, there's not enough new mines coming online, and with the lead times and the permits and everything, it just, they don't think it can get there. So, but maybe at 20 million or maybe at 10 million units by 2030, then the just with the fact that they'll have like total EV supply is probably, or demand is probably going to be well north of 10 million. And if the other people are not moving as aggressively to secure their supply chains, maybe all the other auto companies to combine can only get another 10 million or something like that. And so then Tesla's got 50% market share and like huge pricing power. So their mindset was like margins could actually improve drastically from here just because Tesla's moving the most aggressively to secure the supply chain. So that's a kind of interesting scenario where like top line growth is a lot more limited than people think. But because of Tesla's like pricing power and just the fact that they're securing the supplies, they actually think that there could be really strong pricing power. So that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure that I 100% buy into that thesis, but talking about this Monte Carlo simulation of all the different potential outcomes over the next couple of years, that's one that I think could also pan out.
Fascinating stuff. I think the point around Tesla's margins increasing into the future is such a foreign and weird way to think about Tesla's long-term growth, because every other sort of I don't know, business example you could ever think up of, the more you go into, call it mass market, or the bigger your volumes, your margins come down because of price sensitivity. But the lever that Tesla has of, well, we're just going to make costs go down faster, is bananas. It's completely bananas and so foreign, And I wonder if a lot of the doubt from that respect is because they've already made, quote unquote, so much improvement from that perspective that there's some sort of dissonance that says, well, like, how much lower can you go? How much lower can you go? And I think back to the time when I used to be at Tesla and I walked the Fremont factory multiple times. I knew how, by the time I left, the company was in 2021 was quite profitable. They were turning out profits. And I still remember walking around Fremont, which was their first factory. And this is no shade on Elon or anybody, but I was like, God, there's a lot of costs in here that could be taken out.
Yeah.
God, there's so much cost in here that can be taken out. And no disrespect, it's just literally how it was, And I think everybody at Tesla would agree, because you think about how the factory is built. It's like this weird, there's 17 different, segments of the factory that are not the flow of product. They showed this in slides before. It's just weird. It's like, it's not a straight line like Shanghai is,
Yeah.
and Berlin and Austin are not even close to being ramped. So that you haven't fully realized the cost savings from that perspective. And then think about once Fremont goes into that model where, they either freaking tear it down and build a new one, or they use that structure for products that aren't dependent on such a big footprint to be built, maybe like the bot and other products, potentially maybe an HVAC for homes. They take all the car production out of Fremont over time and they plop them into these different factories that are much more streamlined, and where the flow of material is conducive to building a very, very cheap car, and you're not really dependent on conveying that stuff around, and you can optimize the space to ensure the product is built as efficiently as possible, blah, blah, like a lot of second order effects from that, right? Yeah. That is also very, sort of add into the conversation you were just going through. That's another variable that gets lost, is that there's still a significant percentage of Tesla's total production capacity that comes out of their first generation factory that is kind of a mess compared to a Shanghai or an Austin or a Berlin. And again, no disrespect. They're still, and that kind of a mess is way more profitable than the state-of-the-art GM factory. Y'all, like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Well, and Berlin and Austin are still ramping too. So those are actually lower margin, at least in last quarter, than Fremont was. But it's such a good point, because I still talk to short sellers, and they've requested anonymity. But one short seller I was talking to recently, is like, his mantra was just like, look, their margins are going to go away because capitalism kind of has this history of margin outperformance will revert to the mean. So like Tesla's margins are not going to be sustainable at these levels because the other companies, they're not dumb. They're going to come in and they're going to like find, okay, gigacasting is great, we'll implement gigacastings, and you're starting to see some of that now. And so his point was like, they're going to get just competed away and chipped, and eventually GM's margin or whoever's Toyota, they're all going to have the same gross margins as Tesla. I think that really overlooks, how important the cultural piece of Tesla is. And just look at the decisions that are being made right now. Like, Tesla is completely redesigning factories, like from the ground up. Like Shanghai was like just completely rethought. A lot of the learnings from that are now in Berlin and Austin. And like, you look at what GM is doing right now, and look what Ford is doing. Ford is like retrofitting the River Rouge factory, which was like literally the original Henry Ford built this factory. And now they're making electric trucks there. And like, okay, no disrespect, good. I'm glad that they're, moving into the future, but they're not going to be making the margins that Tesla's making. Well, they're not going to be making the margins on a F-150
Apples to
truck, which
apples.
is like a premium, like, I don't know what those go for, but probably close to six figures, I would think. But their gross margins, according to what reading between the lines of Jim Farley, are like negative. So meanwhile, Tesla can produce a Model 3, sell it for like $43,000 at a 20% margin out of Fremont, which kind of sucks as a factory, to your point. So it's like a whole different level. GM's doing the same thing. Like they've got this factory that they've had forever in Hamtramck, which is just outside of Detroit. And they just renamed the factory and they're calling it like Factory One or something really, I forget exactly like that. And it's like, okay, you're retrofitting a factory and renaming it. That doesn't improve the process flows. Like, tell me how that's going to, make positive or like 25% gross margins, or even what's the trajectory to get to 25% EV margins out of this factory when your volume, expectations are like 50,000 units a year. It doesn't make any sense. And so when I start seeing some, announcements for like a radically redesigned factory, and the engineers are actually making the decisions, and the designers are sitting in the factory floor with the actual workers, like then I'll have give a little bit more credit to the capability of these companies to compete on margin. But like, to me, it's just like the theory of things should converge over time makes sense, but when you look at the details, I don't think that works, at least in the medium term.
Yeah. And like my counter to that would be, okay, so how come that doesn't hold true for Apple? Right. Yeah. Okay. Two different segments, but like Apple's margins are bananas compared to every single other cell phone manufacturer. And yes, these are $1,000 consumer products, but these used to be 200 back in the day, 150. A flip phone wasn't that expensive. An individual has changed. If you think about the cell phone market, they 5x'd, more than 5x, how much they were willing to pay for a product that was offering a specific use case, but evolved over time. Most people buy a phone because of, used to buy a phone because you could talk to somebody when you're on the beach. But now nobody talks to each other on the phone. We text and we go on Twitter and we go on YouTube and other things as well. There's a lot of things you do on a phone. So to me, that's a much better sort of, it's much more analogous to the Tesla story than the car industry or any other industry that's thought up within that context. That there are outliers, there are exceptions to the rule, and the consumer behavior that applies to an Apple, to me, is much more analogous to Tesla than anything else in this world. It really is, to me. And you layer on the SaaS portion of it too, right? And the App Store. Apple has the same exact dynamic that Tesla has as well. Full self-driving is a software as a service. You just download it and boom, you go. It's so counterintuitive to and this is where I can be very I can sympathize with shorts or people that think that this is not a long-term story that's going to be valued at this perspective, because you have so many data points from the past that will tell you otherwise. But I think once the proof, like once you start digging into how Tesla is capturing the supply chain and just how much effort is being put into the core engineering and the core problem solving, and how do we ensure we have the lowest cost humanly possible, that's where the story changes, because nobody else, especially entrenched players, knows how to do that. They just don't know how to do that. It's not part of their culture, like you said. And that's what we're betting on,
For sure. And it's so interesting because we've been talking the last 20 minutes only about how ridiculously good Tesla is at optimizing costs, and scaling, production at a ridiculous rate. And like, to your point about Apple, like 15 years ago when they introduced the iPhone, who would have thought that people would be willing to pay $1,000 for an iPhone and then like pay a bunch more on like subscriptions for like cloud storage and all the different like nickels and dimes that Apple gets you for, that you're kind of happy to pay because it's just such a good product.
But Twitter blue, baby.
Twitter blue. But Tesla, like, we haven't even talked about FSD yet, and like Tesla has the potential to completely change like the economics of car ownership, like completely. And even if I've always thought of this as like a two-tiered approach. One is just like, it's a great ADAS system and you get a little bit of a higher take rate, and that really pads the margins. I mean, with how much they're selling this for. If you double take rate, that's going to like explode your gross margin. But and even that, the take rate would only be like 20%. So like you can run crazy scenarios where it's like 50% FSD take rate. And like Tesla doesn't look like a car company anymore. It doesn't look like a manufacturing company anymore. Even though they're like world class at manufacturing this stuff, they're also world class at having the potential to sell like 100% margin software on top of this hardware platform that they've built. Let alone the potential that they actually achieve autonomy and can sell robo taxis. So like it's just the runway of advantages they have is why, you know, in the midst of this storm and you know, getting battered as an investor and Elon tweeting all this stuff, I'm like, okay, well, when I look at the fundamentals, and I try to attack it all the time from, you know, to make sure I'm not just drinking the Kool-Aid. But the fundamentals are so ridiculously strong, and I don't know who can compete with them. When you look at the supply chain, when you look at their manufacturing prowess, when you look at their technology, their software, their AI team, like my God, they've got advantages everywhere you look. It's mind blowing. So yeah, I'm still so optimistic as an investor, but I don't know when the market's gonna wake up again.
And you put that in contrast of him getting booed in San Francisco yesterday. Like this is why this time is so freaking confusing. It's so confusing because you just, like you said, we talked for the last 20-25 minutes on Tesla's incredible ability to execute on cost and to just be masterful from that perspective. Oh, and by the way, they have the best EV product out as well in tandem for that. So they don't only have the cheapest cost to produce, they also have arguably the best product out of the market. So you have those two things, and then you got Elon getting booed in San Francisco. It's so weird. It's such a weird time, and I can understand why. Like it's almost like there's division within the Tesla investing community because of that. Because it's just the story is so good. It's so good that when there's something that's perceived as being hurtful, either true or not, is it's tough to reconcile because it's like, come on, bro, it's so good. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Any other thoughts before we do some Q&A here? What are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I mean, we could Q4, you know, we didn't go into all the details of that, but you know, we're kind of just guessing at this point. You know, I think their margins are probably going to improve this quarter. But yeah, no, let's just do some Q&A.
Sure. Okay. So we're going to try this for the first time ever. So it could be a massive success or a colossal disaster. So this is what we're going to do. Producer wife, by the way, shout out producer wife. Thank you very much. You've done great so far by just listening to us talk. We are going to try and bring in questions from Spaces into YouTube. Oh my goodness. So this is how it's going to work. If you have a question on Twitter Spaces, request the mic, and I will bring you into Spaces. And then once I do that, producer wife will share a screen with Twitter on it with sound. And in theory, our YouTube audience should be able to hear the question that's being asked on Spaces. And then everybody should be able to listen to our question, our answer, or thought, whatever the person on Twitter has. So let's see what happens. Cross your fingers. Okay, here we go. So producer wife, I'm going to bring somebody up on stage, and then I'm going to throw it over to them. And once that happens, please share their screen with audio with Twitter on it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring on Ashok, who may or may not be the Ashok we're thinking of.
It's not. I had to check. I did a double take.
Damn it.
They're at IBM.
It's okay. Like. We still love Ashok. All right, Ashok. Go ahead and producer wife, please share the screen with audio on YouTube. Who may or may not be the Ashok. Ashok, can you hear us, sir?
It's not. I had to check. I did a double take.
Can you hear him, Matt?
He's still a listener. It looks like.
Oh, maybe he removed himself. Okay, let's try again. Stop sharing the screen. Perfect. Yeah, so the one thing to keep in mind is as we're sharing the screen, we got to make sure we unshare it while we're talking. Otherwise, the audience will hear double. So we're going to bring in Colin. So let's see. All right, Colin, you are live on Spaces. Go ahead and ask your question or share your thought. And producer wife, go ahead and share the screen. As we're sharing the screen, we got to make sure we unshare it while we're talking. Otherwise, the audience will hear double. So we're going to bring in Colin. So let's see. All right, Colin, you are live on Spaces. Go ahead and ask your question or share your thought, and producer Wef, go ahead and share the screen.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak here. Great spaces so far. My question is, I don't know, just with Elon and Twitter, I'm sure we've probably already discussed this. I came in a little bit late, so I don't know if you guys have already deeply talked about this, so I apologize. But just like I feel like I'm looking at Twitter, I've never seen so much hate towards not just Elon. Like we're all used to like the normal hate when it comes to Tesla Q and just promoting all the FUD. But like I think at this point it's like broadened out to people that are even outside of just even in the finance community. So I guess my question is like in the short term, I can see it maybe affecting some sales, but how do you guys see it like in the next 2 to 3 years? Do you think it'll be one of those things where you won't even remember what what was going on in the news 2 years ago? We might only because we're heavily following Elon and Tesla, but like I think the majority of people might forget. But
Great
do
question.
you think
Thank you.
it's one of those things
Let's
that
go.
might
I'm gonna
actually
stop sharing the screen. Okay. First time we've ever done this on YouTube. So if you are seeing some weirdness, it's part of the game. We'll figure it out. Let's go ahead, Matt. What are your thoughts there? We spoke about it at length at the beginning, but maybe give us a
Yeah,
refresher.
maybe just the high level summary is, we think, as far as I've mentioned, the kind of Pareto principle that like, yeah, he probably is alienating, some amount of people, but from our point of view, it's maybe like 10% on the left and 10% on the right, or maybe it's like 18% on the left right now and 2% on the right. I don't know what the mix is, but the vast majority of the car buying public is that, 80% in the middle that is going to buy a car based on the specs, based on the performance, based on the price, like all the things that you normally, you care about as a car buyer. And you might think, oh yeah, like Elon, he's the guy that overpaid for Twitter, right? Or you may have some perception of him, but it doesn't influence the car buying decision. So I think from our point of view, what we were saying, at least what I was saying earlier, was, there's potential that you are alienating a couple buyers on the left, but maybe you're also ingratiating yourself to some buyers on the right who maybe wouldn't have considered you otherwise. But in the grand scheme of things, I think macro is going to really outweigh any people who are buying or not buying for political reasons. So I think it's a smaller consideration in the face of potentially a recession.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where we've I think that's where my head is at too. That's sort of the thought process that I'm going through is there is a chance that a lot of this is just noise, and most of the people that are really worried about the story, or most of the people that are going to buy a Tesla don't care about the noise, and it's just going to be a cost benefit analysis into their life. So yeah, thank you very much, Colin. I'm going to go ahead and remove you from speaker here. Thank you so much for your question. And let's bring on the next person. Thank you so much. Let's do Ashok next. All right. Ashok, can you hear us? Go ahead. Oh, yes, sir, I can. Bring on the next person. Thank you so much. Let's do Ashok next. All right. Ashok, can you hear us? Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir, I can.
Yes, yes. Hi. Sorry, I think the first time I was on mute. My question is the stock right now, the way it's performing.
It's a good question.
I think it's not.
I
It's
think
not
for
like
me,
any of the Teslas correct
there's
now
two things going on. I think there is a variable
because
of
of the Twitter
um
going on, or is it? Is it
man, there is a piece where Tesla, for say from 2019 to 2021, was very much valued quite aggressively, and a lot of people would say, well, that's warranted, and some of people would say, well, it was overrun. It went too fast, too quick, too fast, or too high, too fast. And now that we're in a bear market, companies that have a multiple because of growth are going to get punished quite a bit. And then you have the layer on top of that of there is I think an investing community and institutionals and retail and so on and so forth that are probably afraid to dip their toes in the water with Tesla specifically because there is a level of risk and uncertainty with the company as far as the leader speaking his mind and doing what he does. So that definitely is a variable, but I think ultimately the bear market, macro, the Fed, my gut tells me it's like 80 to 90% of what's truly hurting the stock. And then there is a 10 to 20% impact from the other stuff that we talked about. And if the way we're thinking about it is correct, this should be a short to medium term. If the stock market is really worried about performance of the company and its ability to generate returns for investors, this will all solve itself in time, as long as the brand perception that sort of Elon theoretically is potentially either harming or impacting in some way doesn't derail the long-term story. And my thought process says that that's not the case, because I think most people don't really care about the stuff that we are really focused on. And it just, again, becomes a question of what's the value to cost ratio of the product? And if the value to cost ratio of the product, if the product itself is super profitable, then people invest in companies that make a lot of money. And that's just the thing. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think very clearly the fundamentals have been disconnected from the stock price. How long that continues is a legitimate question, I think. There is a little bit of legitimate concern, I think, woven in there of what's going on in China, like that. I think if there was no China concerns whatsoever, and it was just like very clear that there was demand and long lead times, and the Tesla China website said deliveries in Q2 because the backlog is so long, I think that would definitely have the stock above 200 or something like that. So I don't want to say that this is all kind of related to just Elon being Elon, but I do think it's very severely disjointed from reality from my point of view right now. So I think, but that's just the sort of thing that it's the old Warren Buffett quote that the stock market in the short term is a voting machine, and in the long term it's a weighing machine. So we'll see what Tesla actually posts over the next 4, 8, 12 quarters, and if we're right on kind of our view on where things are going, then I think there's not investment advice, but it seems a lot more likely than not that we'll have a revaluation upward.
Nice. Thanks, Matt. Unfortunately, that's going to be our last question on Twitter Spaces. We're having a lot of challenges with delay between the feed of Twitter Spaces and YouTube. So what we're going to do is we're going to move to the Q&A over to YouTube. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments section on YouTube. If you would like to drop a question for this as well on YouTube, go ahead and click on my profile. You should be able to find my YouTube channel in the description of my profile on Twitter, and we can take it from there. So let's go ahead and ask your questions in the comments section. Producer wife, if you can take us back to the perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for trying this out on the fly, everybody. This is we tried it. It doesn't seem like it's working the way we want it to. We'll brainstorm of ways on how to make this better. Maybe we just can't do a Q&A session on Spaces while we're on YouTube. We'll have to think through it a little bit more. So go ahead and type question before your question on YouTube, and then drop it down in the comment section, and then producer wife will bring up only the best ones. Only the best ones, okay? From Hadouken, look, perfect, $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Hadouken. Street Fighter. When do you foresee?
Hadouken.
That's way better. By the way, Emmett and Dave Lee need to like these. Apparently, both of them are crazy Street Fighter like gamers. So I
Yeah.
think we should live stream those two fighting with each other, and they need to put a bet on like the charity that they want to like, and the winner gets to like I don't know. We'll figure it out, but it needs to happen. That would
I'm
be
on
good
board.
content. Yes. Come on, Dave and Emmett. When do you foresee supercharging network needing overhaul? V4's out soon. Version 4 is out soon. Only some cars support V3, and only so many S charger stalls. Thank you so much, Hadouken, for the question. How are you thinking about this, Matt?
I mean, it's like the supercharger network's going to be a continuous improvement like forever. I think. I mean, if EV adoption really is going to go to 10 or 20 million units by 2030, then like you're going to need way more stalls. You're going to need them to be faster. And so, in my mind, I think Tesla's approach is the right one. They're adding a lot of new superchargers every year, and then they're also upgrading the existing ones. So I don't. In terms of like an overhaul, I think that sounds like we're going to invest like X billion of dollars this year to modernize everything. But I think the way that Tesla's been doing it is actually a pretty smart, where you just kind of continually improve what you have out there. But I am curious to see whatever this V4 thing is, because that was really kind of messing with my brain when you're talking about a 1 megawatt charger. So I can't wait to see what that looks like.
Yeah. I think it will need an overhaul at some point, at least part of it. Really, where my head goes to is like, okay, once Tesla Semi is out and once Cybertruck is out, which theoretically, from the hints that we got in the Tesla Semi presentation, Cybertruck would be able to take advantage of that charging technology as well. There's going to be a segment of the network that needs to be upgraded, but I think ultimately, if you think about what are the use cases for Tesla today, the current charging network seems more than adequate to support EVs in the world. And it's just a matter of, okay, just make it better.
Yeah.
And then it's not super critical, but I think it's going to yet again be another variable that's going to be, yeah, Tesla does this better than everybody else. So, and there's no question. And it just becomes a moat like other things have in the past, in my opinion. All right, next question. Terry off. Question: is it possible that Elon wants to see the Tesla price fall to prevent his employees from retiring? Well, damn it, Elon. I can take this one first. I don't think
you did retire.
I know. I'm sorry, bro. Like, I'm sorry, Elon, for yeah, my bad. No. I don't think that's how he thinks. I'm sure there is a part of the variable that says, well, if our stock price goes way too high, way too fast, then there is going to be a subset of the workers that will leave the company that otherwise would have brought a lot of value to Tesla. But I think about it from a total talent perspective, and Tesla is going to be able to have the talent it wants at any time, at any point in time. And I really do think that people that really want to solve the biggest problems on Earth want to work at companies like Tesla. And if there are people that retire, fine, just they can find better people. I'm sure there's 1,000 people. I'm sure there's 1 million people out there that are better than I am and what I did that could go in there and make 10x the impact that I did. So I see it as a non-issue, and I think that's how Elon thinks about it. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, he did have a comment. I forget in which interview this was, but in the last couple of months, about how it was like a mild problem that you had like a bunch of millionaires and some of them ended up leaving. Didn't sound like it was like a catastrophic issue by any means. So I don't think he actually wants to see the price fall to like keep employees around, because I mean it's two sides of the same coin. If he really does believe that the company's going to 10x from here, well, then all the stock awards that he's granting to new employees at this level, like they're going to be all the more likely to retire sooner from having gotten into the company at this low stock price. So to me, like I agree. I don't think he's really thinking about it this way.
Next question. Tony, he asks really good questions. Thank you, Tony. Question: do you think Tom Zhu? How do you say it?
Yeah, let's go with that. Tom Zhu.
Do you think Tom's presence in Fremont, Berlin could be a sign that those factories are getting ready to mega ramp production of LFP M3 MYs? What do you think, Matt?
to me, his presence probably has more to do with his changing position within the company as opposed to changing technology within the specific factories. I don't think it's like they would bring him in just to help with the LFP ramp, although it wouldn't hurt if they were starting to do that. But I don't know. I'm not reading that much into it, but I'm curious what you think. I don't have a strong opinion either way.
Oops, I meant Austin, not Berlin. Okay. No problem. I think his presence is just I think it's positive from the standpoint that Tesla China is the place where a lot of the ideals that Tesla has from a cultural perspective of innovation and fast change and moving forward, Shanghai is a shining example of the positives of that. Because you think about how it ramped, think about how resilient it is within the context of how difficult it has been to operate in China in the last couple of years because of COVID, and then think about the amount of margin it's added to the company from its efficiency. So to me, it's just how Tesla operates. They try to find the best talent anywhere, and they try to take best practices from anywhere and applying them to those places. I don't know if it's directly tied to the mega ramp of LFPs. I just think it's Shanghai is really good at what they do. What can we do in Austin, Berlin, and Fremont that we've learned in Shanghai that we can apply here, plus all the new ideas we're going to get from Austin, Berlin, and Fremont. And that is, from my experience working at the company, that's the kind of dynamic that made magic happen. You take your learnings, you put it in a place that's brand new, and then you're like, okay, but we can do this even better now because of what you've shown us here. So it's just great practice. It's great business practice, and I encourage every business in the world to do that. Just take your best talent and put them in places that could benefit from it, and leave it wide open for the best ideas to come forward. It's just good business practice. Let's do a couple more. Michael, question: how big can Tesla insurance become? Would they ever get into home insurance, renters, etc., so they can bundle insurance packages with their car's robotaxi? Maybe this is a better question for you, Matt. But for me, I just think of Tesla insurance as a car only or product only, whatever they release. And over time, as those products become safer and safer, and have a lower risk of having some sort of unintended consequences, which is really what insurance is for, then it becomes a smaller percentage of Tesla's. I don't know. It's just not that big of a deal. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I used to just think that insurance would be like a nothing. They would price it at like a 0% gross margin, or like 0% operating margin, let's say, and it would be part of the value proposition to expand ownership of the vehicle. So it's like, oh, not only do you get the vehicle, but you get a really good rate on insurance. I've started thinking they might actually have some somewhat meaningful margins out of insurance, but I think certainly right now it's in the small phase. It's not available in very many states. And in terms of getting into home insurance and renters, like I don't think they would do that necessarily. Maybe like well into the 2030s they might do that, but in my mind, what makes a lot of sense and where I think they're going to go with Tesla Energy long term is you have solar, you have EV charging, you have a home furnace, like a home HVAC system that's all like electric induction, and you could maybe even have like a cook stove or something like that. But then you can manage that whole system to optimize for pricing in wholesale markets, and then you can also bundle that with all the other homes in the area and have like the world's best virtual power plant and actually access in real-time pricing. They're a long way from achieving that goal. But in my mind, that's like, from my experience in the energy side, is like that is the holy grail, is like real-time control of like pricing or of production and demand on a distributed basis, where you're having like very great signals of when you should turn on your HVAC and everything like that, down to like the minute level. It's a very complicated problem to solve, but that to me makes more sense with their kind of long-term vision than going further vertically integrating into insurance.
Got it. Let's do one more. Merlin, question: could the renewed Model 3 become the $25,000 car? I don't think so at all. I think the Model 3 has too many legacy components that make it so that it can't be as efficiently built as humanly possible, even with front and rear castings, even with a structural battery pack. I think the the type of manufacturing processes for robotaxi to achieve the cost per mile they're thinking of is going to have the next generation of the improvements. And for you to be able to rework the Model 3 to do that, you're better off just starting a brand new line than to try and rework your current line, because you just have a lot of inherent inefficiencies. And then the other thing to think about is Model 3 is really just being built in Fremont. And like I said before, the Fremont layout and the way that factory was initially built when Toyota and GM owned it, Numni.
Yeah,
I think it was
United Motor Manufacturing Inc.
That's right. It's just not conducive to building the cheapest car humanly possible. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Model 3 it just costs too much. I mean, even if you really stripped it down and did like a one casting to do the whole thing, I don't think that's enough. I think, and I think Franz has even hinted at this, that the product that he's most excited about is the one that he's working on now. So to me, I think I'm kind of in the camp, and I don't know, not everyone agrees with this, but that the $25,000 car is actually the same as the robotaxi. So they won't actually sell it for $25,000, but it will so change the overall economics of car ownership and the transportation cost per mile that it will effectively undercut everything else, even at really fantastic gross margins.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's call it there for Q&A. We're almost 2 hours in. Thank you everybody else who has added super chats, super thanks, all that good stuff that we didn't get to. Unfortunately, producer wife can bring those up. Yeah, thank you all very much for your contributions. Really appreciate y'all. Matt, any sort of last thoughts? Any sort of closing thoughts here before we wrap the sucker up?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a great conversation. It's a tough time to be a Tesla bull, honestly, and I think it's been hard to see some of the stuff that Elon's been doing. I think the one thing I want to say, just in all the chaos of last week and this, I think some of the flack that you and I have got for taking what I think is kind of like moderate approaches to all the controversy is like, let's just try to create space for a debate. I was not saying like a buyback was like the cure all for the stock, but I got accused of that. I know you had, kind of similar things. So, I think the more we can just listen with an open mind and, be open to criticisms of Elon's actions and not just say Elon sucks because stock price is down, but if there's actually thoughtful criticisms of like, hey, I think we could do more to communicate better with the company as our shareholders, or, I think now might be a time for the board to consider some of the feedback from our number one retail investor, Kogon Leo. Like, I think it's just really important for us to be open-minded, for us to actually have this first principles approach and not to just be overly dogmatic in our optimism. So that's the last kind of thought. I think it's probably what prompted this conversation to begin with. So
that's awesome.
That's what I'd say.
I couldn't agree more. I think in the spirit of free speech, in the spirit of what I think Elon's trying to build with Twitter and really discourse in general, this is what I'm most excited about, is that I feel comfortable in having a platform where I can sit down and talk about any and all ideas, even in our own little bubble, that may make people uncomfortable or may make people I don't know, just be angry with me for whatever reason. I think that's a great thing, because the way I view it is, how do you maximize the flow of ideas and thoughts so that we can arrive to the true end goal of moving society forward? And I want to do everything I can to be part of whatever that solution is. And I'm thankful to have people like you, and I'm thankful to have the community and audience that I receive. It's freaking crazy that there's 1,000 people on YouTube watching this right now. Like, to me, that's mind blowing to me. And there's people on Spaces listening to this and whatever else. But I think ultimately that's what's most important, to sitting down and discussing ideas and hearing all sides, and doing so in a respectful and constructive manner, even if we're wrong, even if we are, maybe we don't know anything and we're just speaking out of our asses. That's the whole point. I think that's the whole point.
Time. So if we're
exactly
that wrong, like, let's figure it out and be like, oh gosh, remember that time when we thought Tesla was going to the moon? Wow, how can I make sure I don't make that mistake again? Like,
exactly.
I clearly don't think that's the case, but the goal of anything, any aspect of your life, is to try to be learning and to try to move forward. And I think when I've seen some things that have made me think parts of the community might be getting a little kind of dogmatic on, any sort of criticism of anything. It just means either you're an idiot or you don't believe in the mission, or any one of a number of kind of accusations that's getting thrown around. And I just don't think that's helpful.
Sure, I agree. And again, I support folks being able to espouse those ideas and push them forward. But in the same token, I think it's also extremely valuable to be able to have those open conversations and not just saying, hey, like, just be quiet. It's So thank you all so much for coming in and listening to us to do randos talk about Tesla. And really appreciate you guys. Love you so much. And we'll see you on the next one. Matt, thank you so much, man. Seriously, I love talking to you. You're one of my favorite people, bro. You really are. I really feel a kinship with you. And I'm so appreciative that you make the time to speak with me today. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure. And I think when I was down there in Austin, I told producer wife that I had a man crush on you. So the fact that she lets me on the channel, I think that's a good sign that, she doesn't feel too threatened. That's good.
That's right. That's freaking hilarious.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you, producer wife. Thank you so much. You did a great job today, even though the Twitter Spaces thing was difficult to manage. Thank you so much for being so, look at that. She's right there. Yeah, you deserve those claps. And please.
Quick thing. So I couldn't remember what the press, the fourth estate. That's the phrase I was trying to remember earlier in the conversation.
Oh, got
the press
it.
is supposed to be the fourth estate. And my sleep deprived brain couldn't come up with that. So
got it.
Thank you to Luigi ZHP for correcting me on that.
Nice. Dude, that was like an hour and a half ago.
I
love that.
That must be on a lag.
Yeah, it must be on a lag. Thank you, everybody. Happy Monday. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.